Thank you, Rita. Buenas and half a day to, gosh, it looks like over 100 people. I was looking at the gallery and I see family from old colleagues from all over the place. And so it's really exciting to see you. I was especially excited to see Larry and an old friend, Mark Pascas, open this at the UT in Hagatna. For those of you who don't know, when I was at the University of Guam in the 1990s, from 92 to 2001, we were able to start a canoe program and working with men mostly from Polowat Atoll. And one of the first projects was to build that ute there, that canoe house. And we needed a name for it that captured what it was that we were trying to do. And the name, a lot of people don't know. And I'm not sure if it's still used there because, as it should, that canoe house has undergone a lot of changes and a lot of evolution. But the name that we chose was Sadzantasi Fachamuan. And of course, in Chamorro, Sadzantasi translates to something like the sea as and as meeting place. And in Carolinian Fachamuan, or in the Central Carolines, Fachamuan is like old spirits. And so we wanted to reflect this moment of coming together between Chamorros, indigenous, non-Chamorros like myself from Guam, who wanted to work in the revitalization of canoe culture. And in many respects, what I was especially proud of, and what continues to inform the work I do here with Dakota and other Pacific Islander communities, even if I'm in American Indian Studies, was shaped and it continues to be informed by the work that we were doing there. This would feature how higher learning has to be engaged in the place where it's located, and specifically the indigenous people. There's also the power of cultural traditions, not just in their own right as the birthright of the people who own it, but also its power to help us rethink narratives about who we are, about how the past is understood, about how politics and issues of power are understood. And so it was from the work around canoes in particular that I continue to look to what I always see as a homegrown tradition that has legs, that has the capacity to not only serve us who have rights and connections to it, but for everybody, in this idea that a canoe and the culture and where it comes from has that carrying capacity. And so what I wanted to do is share with you some of the ideas as they've unfolded over the last 20 years, as I've been working in the context of American Indian studies in the Midwest, but always with the American Indian communities, first in Michigan. This would be Anishinaabe, Ojibwe folks, but also in Illinois, and now at the University of Minnesota, where Tina and I are located. And I'm going to switch to a slide. Can you guys see that? Can I get some kind of thumbs up? Okay, good. So the Pioneer Public TV in Minnesota recently did I thought, a really excellent episode on a project that we've launched last year that brought Mario Benito, a Polawatt navigator who was actually ordained in the pole ceremony with Larry at the 2016 FESPAC. A lot of you will remember that. And Mario is someone I've worked with for almost 30 years now from Polawatt. We brought him out, and he worked with a community of Chukis in a town called Milan here to build this canoe that you see. And two additional features of the project was that the working on the canoe also involved Dakota community members who are also interested in revitalizing their canoe traditions and their traditional ecological knowledge around water, lands, skies, and things like that. And so this was a collaboration with the Chukis and the American Indian communities, specifically the Upper and Lower Sioux people. But there was also a collaborative with STEM researchers, especially in the School of Design and Engineering. And the, we're not able to show the video for technical reasons, but the opening of this, and I invite you to check, just Google Pioneer Public TV season 11, episode 3, and it's just called Canoe Project. But it's like a 12-minute long, I think, excellent thing that about this relationship. And it just came out a few months ago. And it opens with the launching of the canoe and my voice saying, we shouldn't be surprised to find a Micronesian canoe in a lake in the middle of the plains in Minnesota, because we have deep in our cultural and historical DNA movement in our blood. And what I wanted to do today was present material on two registers. One, the kind of in abstract language, what I might call the wisdoms that I've learned from seafaring over the last 30 years, the things that I think are profound truths that have a lot to teach us. And I'll explain why. But the second register, I want to show images from 3 projects that we're doing through the Native Canoe Program with the communities. So let me go ahead and get that, begin there. The first point, this wisdom, is this. Canoe culture teaches us how to be a real human through relations of kinship and reciprocity with other than human beings. And the other than human beings include the elements of land, water, and sky forms. The second wisdom that I take away from seafaring culture is how these relations of kinship and reciprocity, how they're forged through millennia disciplined and artful study. And the study involves observation, but also other multi-sensory and deeply embodied engagement. So it's not just observation, it's not just the visual, it's fully embodied. And it involves this disciplined and artful relation with these other than human natural and even supernatural forms of beings. So these kinship and reciprocity relations are also relations of knowledge. So the third point is how these relations have evolved into powerful and compelling cultural ways of being. Philosophers call this ontology, the status and the conditions of what it means to exist as a person or as a people. But they've also evolved ways of knowing, or epistemologies, traditions of knowledge, systems of knowledge. And these relations are also moral and ethical systems. So there's notions of what's right and what's wrong and how one should live. So these are three biggies for me. A couple others. Seafaring culture teaches us a lot about place, roots, and depth. And these are all interrelated. For example, the importance of place, especially for Native people, is as the site or the location where the connection runs deep. You might think of it as vertical, going downwards, deep in time. So they're time honored cultural substance. So the depth is also substantive, it's heavy, it's laden with deep meaning. So place is associated with depth in substance and in wisdom, and it's picked up by the idea of roots in the same way that roots can go down deep. And roots are who we are, and they're stable. Now, roots in terms of depth also gives us the notion of time, as in long time ago, deep time. The deep time of Australian Aboriginal history runs back to 60, 70,000 years at least. 60, 70,000 years. But the depth is also substance. So we might say, for example, that place matters for natives. And that's a kind of truism. Almost everybody recognizes that. They acknowledge it. And in fact, it's been so associated with nativeness for good, but also in some pretty bad ways. And I'll return to that in a while. But one of the things that comes out of the importance of place, roots, and depth is the importance of knowing one's proper place. That's a big one in Native studies and in Native politics. It was transformative for me as a young scholar to realize my place as a non-Chamorro, on Chamorro homelands. But seafaring also teaches us about travel, mobility, routes, and reach, the importance of travel or mobility, and the technologies and capacities that enable successful travel. Here's where you're going to start seeing the truths of seafaring culture. And I like to call this routes. So routes and routes. Routes in terms of reach, reach as in distance traveled in geographic or oceanic senses, but also in terms of traveling across time, traveling across cultures, crossing other categories, even crossing material forms, shape shifting, American Indians call it. Christianity or Catholicism calls it transubstantiation, existing in multiple forms simultaneously. Unlike roots, travel and mobility have not been seen as essential features of nativeness. If anything, these have been seen as the essential, as the monopoly of the West or modernity. Travel, mobility, good and bad, progress or imperialism, but it's also always been associated with innovation and progress. The effect is to have it dissociated from nativeness And to only think of nativeness in terms of roots is the effect is, I think, the sequestering of natives and things native in time and place, disassociating us and our traditions from notions of progress, innovation, advancement, science. Seafaring returns that, forces us to put roots and routes together, to see these as not mutually exclusive, but mutually generative. Seafaring returns that important element alongside roots. Two other points. The beautiful thing about being from in Micronesia is we're close by, and we know one of the powerful things about the Central Carolines. It's where this ancient tradition continued, unabated, through centuries of colonial rule. It was from that story of survival that a remarkable story of revival emerged beginning in the 1970s across all of Oceania. The story of survival and revival of seafaring is a powerful 1-2 punch. The takeaway: canoe culture in survival and revival modes furnishes the wisdom of roots and routes, of depth and reach for rethinking nativeness, for rethinking the relationship between the past, present, and future, between the local and the global. Larry started us from the bottom of the sea, but definitions of islands reach up to the stars and include the indigenous creatures and how far they've traveled. This propels us not only forward, but it gives us a homegrown indigenous system for theorizing and putting it into practice. You all know the Pacific. Most people don't realize how big it is. Just our part of Micronesia alone is almost as large as the continental United States, from Palau to the Marshalls. If you include Kiribati, we go almost double the size. That's just Micronesia. This is the map of Austronesian canoes, outrigger canoes, technology, and Austronesian-based languages. Check out this map. I hope you can locate yourself in it. Austronesian speaking outrigger sailing people beginning 3,000 to 5,000 years ago started to fan out. This area of the world is almost 2/3 of the globe's watery surface. This is our local global. What we have in the Central Carolines is the survival of what made this happen. Part of my mission is to take it further. This is our oot, our canoe house in Minnesota. Minnesota is Minnesota Makoche, homelands of Dakota people. Dakota, Lakota, better known or also known as Sioux. They were removed from the state. Less than 1% of the population of Dakota live in either the cities or 4 communities: the upper, the lower Sioux, upper, lower of the Minnesota River, Prairie Island Sioux, and the Shakopee Sioux. 99% of the Dakota people are in exile. Since 1862, they live around here, the surrounding states, all the way up to Canada. At the heart of Sioux country, between the Upper Sioux and Lower Sioux, is a community now known as the Micronesians, a Chukis community in the town of Milan. almost 300. They are almost 2/3 of the town's population. And what's remarkable is that almost all of them are from one island in the Chuk Lagoon, Romanum, Unanu. There's Romanum Island in the bottom, its location in the Chuk Lagoon. We superimpose the Chuk Lagoon on Minnesota Makoche and locate Romanum in it. This is a powerful map. It allows the Chuukese to see where they are in relation to the map that they're familiar with. This is a really powerful graphic that links Micronesia and Chuk and Romanum to Dakota homelands. It's part of the project we're doing with the School of Design. The immediate goal was what would it, if we were to design a Micronesian canoe on Dakota homelands, what would it look like? How can we design a Micronesian ut that knows it's on Dakota waters, lands, and skies? That became the basis for community relations. This is one of the projects Back to Indigenous Futures. It involved building that canoe that I mentioned at the outset, but also Mario and the guys working with the Dakota to build a wata. This is the second wata to have been built for by Sioux, by the Upper Sioux, the Lower Sioux rather, since the 1860s. And I'm proud that it was done with Micronesians, working with them. Here's the wah, that's mine, and the wata. And we do a lot of paddling on the rivers. And of course, we carry the flags, Lower Sioux, the FSM Sioux, the Guam flag. The projects are also virtual. Augmented reality. We can augment reality with 3D pop-ups that can be animated with the right viewing devices, your laptop or your pad or your phone. We've also developed the beginnings of a pretty
Excuse me, Dr.
decent
Hanks.
voyaging simulation.
Excuse
And
me,
I can't
Dr.
show the
Hanks.
videos here, but I noticed Mimi George was in the audience here. Mimi's in the middle there. Mimi, of course, works with folks in Tamako voyaging, and she came up and visited us. In the middle, you'll see you put on the goggles and you're on a wall in the Chuk Lagoon to actual data of the rising and setting stars. We can take a simulated voyage. We can learn how the stars rise and set. But we took it a step further, and you can actually steer the canoe and pull the sail in and move forward. So it's also multi-sensory in that way and not just visual. This is just the start. We hope to be working with Mimi George, whose work also deals with wave navigation in Taumako. And we hope to begin to simulate some of that stuff. I'm going to close very, very quickly with what we're doing with PAFU. PAFU is simply put, it's a way of teaching what stars are used for directional purposes. The rising and setting points in the eastern horizon and the western horizon are marked by shells. The shells represent stars, specific constellations, rising and setting. This is what kids learn to begin to learn the stars. But once we put this in virtual reality, we can actually immerse ourselves in these stars, in this mat and shells. The shells can begin to rise and then they can turn into the stars. We can start in myelin, watch the shells begin to rise and then they turn into the constellations. We can point our canoe from myelin in the plains of Minnesota to where the appropriate stars are, to where Chuk is. And we can begin to voyage from myelin to Chuk. I hope that this will have given you a little bit of what it is that our traditions can do, where it can take us. Thank you.